A runaway favorite and everybody's pick to sit at number one, the Georgia Bulldogs head into the 2023 season as the clear favorite to win the national title. But really, just how good are they going to be? In this episode, I talked to voices from across the country, both the beat writers on the ground every day at practice, as well as those with a national perspective, to give you a better insight to what to expect from this 2023 Georgia Bulldogs football team. I'm here with Mark Weiser, Georgia beat writer for the Athens Banner-Herald, and he's going to let you guys in on a few little secrets of this Georgia 2023 team. Mark, how you doing this afternoon?
Doing well. I'm not sure if that's overselling my ability to give them secrets, but I'll do my best.
Well, one thing's for sure, you're on the ground and a lot closer than most of us are every day. So I appreciate you taking the time to be here with us. When you look at this 2023 squad, I mean, we all know that they're supposed to be pretty good. Clearly the number one team in both polls heading into the season. But what are you expecting from this group? I mean, you do see them on a daily basis. So especially in terms of like leadership for this team and personality, how are they going to be different than last year's team?
Well, I'll say that with every Kirby Smart team now, probably going forward, I'm expecting, a certain level of ability to just be dominant, and the bar is raised to the level that it doesn't matter which group of recruits roll in here. There's a certain thing now with this team that whether you want to compare it to how Alabama when they had it rolling, I mean, I don't think it really matters too much about, which guy, whether it's A.D. Mitchell or Bear Alexander transferring out and who's coming in, Dom Lovett, who are the top recruits. This program's at a level now that it's going to be year after year. I don't see much fallback type of thing. So what the personality of this team looks like, hard to say right now. I mean, we've seen them this preseason. 3 times we've had the ability to be on the practice field for 10 or 15 minutes. Your best player, Brock Bowers, is not the most talkative guy. He probably is in the meeting rooms and, on the field, it has more to say, but probably a defensive-led team. The secondary is very good. Javon Bullard, Malachi Starks, Kamari Lassiter, et cetera. I mean, you don't have a Jalen Carter up front, but, you have a lot of talent all over the place. And then on the offensive side of the ball, obviously no Stetson Bennett, no ability to, make plays with his feet on third down. We could see that with Carson. We could see that with Brock if he's getting work in there, but very good wide receivers and great offensive line. So, I think you'll see Georgia back in the SEC championship game, and it's going to be tough for someone to beat them on the way there.
Oh, of course, that's good news to all dog fans' ears everywhere. Now, you're right about Brock. When I was at SEC Media Days, I did get him to give me a couple of sentences, but that was it. He was ready to move on, and he certainly didn't want to say anything positive about himself. So you spot on about Brock. So in the offseason, I mean, of course, that's the talking season, and there's been a lot of talk about Georgia's schedule and how it ended up after Oklahoma got taken off. But even with all that said, I've identified a couple of games. The Auburn game as the first road trip of the year at Jordan-Hare, and then the Ole Miss game the week before the Tennessee game as red flag warning games. When you look down the schedule, do you see any pitfalls for this team?
Last year I was talking about Mississippi State as a trap game type of thing, and I guess it might have kind of looked like that during the first half. I don't remember what the score was at halftime. It wasn't like a 3-touchdown lead.
No.
But it's hard to. I mean, Auburn with Hugh Freeze, whether Georgia, will kind of feel, their first time out of Sanford Stadium, whether that's going to matter or not, and how good is Auburn, how fast is the turnaround going to be there? I would say if you're looking at games that are tricky, I mean, it's hard not to say Tennessee and Ole Miss, back-to-back weeks. But, we saw Missouri last year. Nobody saw that, as a game that, Georgia needed to get a late touchdown there. And Kentucky always gives Georgia close games. And, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to really pinpoint. Let's say who's definitely not: UT Martin, Ball State, UAB, Vanderbilt, probably not Florida, and probably not Georgia Tech. So, there's always a chance that one of those other games could kind of be a little bit more scary. South Carolina, we saw what they did in 2019, I guess it was. But this is not the same Georgia program anymore.
That's true. I would agree with that statement. And I'm glad you mentioned Kentucky. That's the most physical game the Dogs play every year in the postseason interviews. That's what they say. So when you come hard like they do, you gotta respect that effort. You've been around the program since 2003, so a nice long run there in Athens. You've seen Coach Mike Bobo as a coach before, both as an assistant and as the OC. So I don't know. Do you have any good Mike Bobo stories you can share with our viewers?
Let me try to give you three.
Oh, okay.
Three? Yeah, three. Okay, so Mike Bobo is getting promoted as play caller. Was that 2006 season at the end? Maybe, I think it was.
Sounds right.
This was a time when you could do player interviews on the field, the practice field, that is, and then Mark Richt would be available on the field as well. I can't remember what player I was talking to. I was still finishing up an interview, and Mark Richt was on the side with a gaggle of reporters, and he was kind enough, I believe, to wait to announce at that point that Mike Bobo was becoming the play caller, because otherwise I would have missed it. I was still doing my other interview. So, I was there when Bobo became play caller, then officially offensive coordinator the following season. Obviously, the South Carolina game in 2014, I guess it was, Bobo's last season here. I guess that was the game where everyone said, why didn't you give the ball to Gurley? It was that the 38-35 game? I think it might be. And a few days later, we had a chance to talk to Mike Bobo in the hallways of Butts Mere, and that was a time where you had to ask Mike about that. Why didn't you give the ball to Gurley? Now, my approach at the time was, let me soften it by not just coming out and asking that really, tough question or whatever. But I said something about, one of the earlier plays. I think it was a play action to the fullback at the time, and I was kind of giving him a chance to, say, we were working on this first, kind of like giving him a chance to, hey, you were trying to do something good and it didn't work out. And, he didn't really want it. He wanted to just to kind of attack the question. And he said, did you watch the play? Meaning about the previous, one of the previous calls. So whenever I see Jake Rowe of 247, he brings that up whenever we're about to talk to Bobo, like we were the other day, because Bobo was a little snippy with that. Who was the fullback back then? I can't remember. The guy that had the helmet thing.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway,
yeah,
he had the face mask on the helmet.
Number 48. Gosh, I can't think of his name. With
I could Google it. I can't remember.
Yeah,
and the other thing,
that's some homework for our viewers.
Yeah, I could Google it and give you an answer right now. The other thing is, I had the chance in 2020 to go to South Carolina and talk to. Go ahead, you want to say something?
Yeah, I got it. It's Quavion Hicks.
Yeah, Quavion Hicks. Yeah,
yeah. There you go.
I think that was something a play before it involved him. Anyway, 2020, I got a chance to go to South Carolina and interview Mike Bobo after a spring practice, or actually after his first spring practice as offensive coordinator there. Will Muschamp hired him, and he gave me about half hour just one-on-one in his office. So, hadn't seen him really since he left in 2015. Except maybe he was at a Georgia practice once when they had a time, some spring break or something. I'm not sure, but saw a different side of Mike Bobo. He was really happy to come back to the SEC and be back in the South. Didn't work out at Colorado State, but at the time the topic was why didn't you come work for Kirby? That was before James Coley was demoted and then left, and nobody would say it on the record, but you got the sense that he had the opportunity to do that if he wanted to. But, maybe going to South Carolina and working at Muschamp at the time seemed like a better fit right away, and obviously didn't work out. And now he gets that chance to be offensive coordinator now with the tough act to follow in Todd Monken.
For sure. And the synergy around that program right now with all the returning players, with all the graduates, all that stuff being inside the building, it has to present a bit of a different dynamic when you're inside the building. I mean, can you feel that when you're there?
Well, we're not really inside the building as much as you would think. They don't even have the media inside Butts Mere anymore. We're like we do interviews in the old team meeting room. We're kind of shuttled off to the baseball press box to work there because although they built an $80 million new football operations center, uh, all the space that was in the old football offices is now used for football support staff. Sports information department is like half in Stegman now, and they're kind of spread around all over the place. So it's pretty much a football first building now, in terms of that space. And, maybe one day when they're building a new practice facility or a couple of practice fields, I know
Yeah.
they're going to probably do some additional parking. Maybe they'll find some space for media there. I'm not sure.
Give a nice workspace. That'd be nice. Be convenient.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not on the top priority list for Kirby and others who are making those calls. So,
Well, let's hope they can do something for us. Mark, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and coming on and talking to our viewers. If you will, just let everybody know where they can follow your work and keep up with the Dawgs.
sure, come to onlineathens.com, and we'll be cranking out the copy as things. We're already doing that, but certainly more as the season only a couple weeks away. So, onlineathens.com, you can find all our work.
Mark, thank you so much for taking time to come on the How About the Dawgscast. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, good to be with you anytime.
So I'm here with Nick Cellini of 680 The Fan fame. He's got a beat on everything that's going on in Atlanta and in the state of Georgia, and he's been kind enough to give us a few minutes to help us look at what's going to go on with these 23 Bulldogs. Nick, thanks for coming on with us.
Anytime, Randy. Thanks for having me.
Hey, man, I'm telling you, I'm walking in high cotton when I'm getting to talk to dudes like you. So let's get right into it. When we look at the season, everybody knows Georgia's going to be pretty good. Clearly, the runaway favorite at number one in both polls headed into the season. But when you look at the team, just from your perspective, what do you think they're going to be? How are you expecting them to do this year?
I mean, you look at the schedule on paper, everybody is saying it's a simple schedule, right? But there's always surprises. I go back to Missouri last year. Who thought that Saturday night was going to be like it was? So a lot of people obviously have that November game against Tennessee circled. But I'm thinking about Auburn with Hugh Freeze. Maybe he gives them a game. That game's at Auburn. Maybe Lane Kiffin comes into Athens and throws a curveball or two. And obviously the SEC championship game, be it, I'm assuming, Alabama or LSU. But if they go undefeated and they make it into the SEC championship game, I think win or lose, they're going to be a part of the 14 playoff. But again, Tennessee is the game everybody has circled on the calendar. I just, for some strange reason, I keep thinking about Hugh Freeze and how he coaches up quarterbacks and how, maybe he can cause maybe not necessarily an upset, but some fits, which might not be a bad thing because I think Kirby always is looking for coaching points over the course of the season. So if it's a close game, much like he did with Missouri last year, he can use it for motivation afterwards.
For sure. And the two games that you mentioned are exactly the two games that I've brought up time and again as a red flag warning kind of situation. First game on the road at Jordan-Hare, which is always difficult to play, and then you have to take on Ole Miss the week before Tennessee. So that could be a pitfall. So I'm with you there. So if we're in the middle of talking season. It seems like it's been talking season forever. And working in the world of radio, there's a lot of people with a lot of takes. And there have been a lot of people, even some players from some other teams that have said they should have beaten Georgia last year, or that if they face them this year, they're absolutely going to take the Dogs down. I'm just curious, when you look at, if you think of it as Georgia versus the field, who out in the field might really pose a threat to the Dogs should they make it into the CFP?
Well, I don't think Michigan's a good matchup for Georgia because I think they're too one-dimensional. A team that can throw the ball like Ohio State. Now, we don't know what questions they have at quarterback, and we also don't know if they're going to make it to the college football playoff. They were fortunate to do that last year. I think the easy answer is LSU, the team that hung with them for a little bit in the SEC championship game last year, and Alabama. Even though they have questions at quarterback, it's still Nick Saban. But certainly when you're a back-to-back national champion and you have a chance to win 3 in a row, which, as you know, hasn't happened since Minnesota in the 30s, right. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. And what I mean by that is you're going to get everybody's best game. I mean, you're going to get everybody's top game. And for that reason, that's why Kirby Smart, I think, is going to use that as motivation, telling the team right now, he already said it once, and he says it every year, I think, that this current edition, you guys haven't accomplished anything. What happened last year, what happened the year before, that's great, but it means nothing now because, like I said, the A game is coming week in, week out. And there's those games that creep up on you, but big picture, it's got to be the two teams from the SEC West that we talked about. I don't think Michigan with their offensive style is a good matchup for them, even though they have their own Georgia period to work on it. And I think an up-tempo offense can give Georgia some fits, or at least give them a challenge, similar to what we saw Ohio State do in the Chick-fil-A Bowl last year.
Okay. That's interesting. Same as it ever was, right? The big boys down here in the SEC are going to have a say in it at the end. So You got to sit down with Coach earlier this year, had a nice conversation with him. Given that and your other exposure to the program, I'm just curious what your read is of Kirby at this moment in time. I mean, he's led the team to back-to-back national championships. What would you say, how would you say he feels about his program right now and this team in particular as they head into the season here in 2023?
Well, I think he learned from Nick Saban. It's first of all, it's perfect for Kirby because he's a Georgia guy and he understands the Georgia culture. But like I said, he's also learned from Nick Saban. So he's never going to be completely satisfied because he feels like once he's completely satisfied, then he's complacent, and complacency kills. And that's why Kirby is just so different from everybody else. But I'll tell you, having had the chance to go and tour the facility there, what they have at Athens, if there's a better facility anywhere in college football, I would love to see what that facility is, because everything Kirby wants, and deservedly so, winning back-to-back national championships, Kirby Smart's going to get. I think deep down inside, he's always going to be driven like his mentor, Nick Saban. But I think by the same token, he's got the program now exactly where he wants it. And there's always going to be staff turnover. And Nick Saban dealt with that as well. And I think he understands the parallels between Saban and him. It's never really going to go away. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing because, like I said, they have the same mindset, and that's what drives them. And I think it's where he wants it, but he's never going to be satisfied. That's just not how he's wired.
Right. And that was on display at SEC Media Days when he told us you have to stamp it out when you see complacency. You have to greet it in the moment. You can't wait. So I think you're spot on in that assessment. Well, Nick, thank you so very much for taking some time to come and sit in here with us and share what you know about the program. Before I let you go, tell everybody where they can listen to your work and maybe find you on the socials if they just need more Nick Cellini in their life.
Yeah, I'd be glad to, Randy. So it's at Cellini Nick, just my name in reverse. You can also listen at the 680 The Fan app. You can listen at 93.7 FM in Atlanta, 680 AM. And let's see, Nick Cellini Facebook, Nick Cellini Instagram, basic enough. And I am on with Chris Domino Monday through Friday, 11 till 2-ish. We go a little past 2, depending upon when we feel like wrapping up the show. For some reason, they give us a carte blanche to end the show when we want. So, 11 to 2-ish, let's say, you can listen to us Monday through Friday.
Wonderful, Nick. Thanks again, man. I really appreciate it.
Sure, Randy, anytime.
All right, everybody. I'm in here with Matt Zemek of Trojans Wire because as much as we love the Bulldogs, as much as we love that red and black, sometimes things can get a little bit blurry when you're too close to it. So we're going to pull back a little bit, get some national perspective from the one and only Matt Zemek from Trojans Wire. Matt, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
We were talking in the green room here before we got started just how far back our long-distance relationship goes. I've been reading Matt's work since 1998. So when I tell you that there are no rookies on this record, and when you come to 8AB, you get the very best, this is what I'm talking about. So, Matt, let's jump right into it. These days, your daily beat is out with Trojans Wire. So we know that you're keeping tabs of what's going on the West Coast. But back here on the East Coast, from a national perspective, when you think about the 2023 Georgia Bulldogs, what do you expect from this team? How do you think they're going to be?
I'm going to expect the team to be as tough as they come in the trenches. I expect them to punch the opponent in the mouth. I expect them to, provide very physical defense on the perimeter. I think the signature game from last season at Georgia, I mean, obviously they crushed TCU in the national championship game, but to me, really the signature performance was that home game against Tennessee. The Volunteers come in with that turbocharged offense, and of course they lit up Alabama's defense like a Christmas tree, absolutely smoked a Nick Saban defense, made it look pretty easy. But Kirby Smart was ready. Kirby Smart had his corners ready to play very physically on an island, one-on-one, and they just punched Tennessee in the teeth. And, that Tennessee offense was, superbly gifted at quarterback, at wide receiver, at all the skill positions, and Georgia just put the clamps on them. It was just an absolute masterclass. That's as good as a Kirby Smart defense gets. And that just ties into how Kirby Smart has, he's found the formula, right? He's cracked the code in terms of replicating elite performance. I mean, that in many ways is what we're really talking about with the very best college football programs, establishing that gold standard. I mean, we know that you're not going to play elite at an elite level every Saturday, but like when your worst game is still good enough, to win in the SEC, when your average game is still, a notch or two better than most of the teams you play, and then when your best game, you're able to play your best game against the best opponents, such as Tennessee, like that really is what it's all about. Because, you're dealing with 19, 20, 21-year-old athletes. There's going to be some fluctuation. There's going to be some variance. There's going to be some volatility. Like you're mentally, you're not going to be in the same place with the same level of focus every week. But it's so having that baseline, like the regular standard is so high that if you fail to meet it, you're not plummeting. In other words, we're not talking about raising the ceiling most of the year. It's maintaining a high floor, and that high floor is good enough. When you're playing C+, B- football, you're still able to beat, a decent opponent. And then when you have to bring your A game, you're able to bring it. That was Georgia last year. The offense was terrible against Kentucky, but the defense was there, so that's part of complementary football. If one side fails, the other side's there to pick it up. Also, the Missouri game, that was a really bad first 2.5 quarters, but the defense was able to hang tough in the red zone, keep the game close enough, and the offense was finally able to do just enough to edge across the finish line. So it's really about having the high floor for, like 10 Saturdays, and then being able to reach that ceiling the 2 or 3 times when you really need to. Kirby Smart's been able to do that. And it's really like Nick Saban showed him at Alabama. I mean, Kirby Smart's time at Alabama under Nick Saban, like Kirby was clearly learning. He was clearly taking notes. He was clearly absorbing. He was taking in the right lessons about how to do things. In terms of Georgia over the past several years, one of the things that comes up for me is that Kirby did seem to be a little bit behind the curve, and it usually showed up when he went up against Nick Saban in Alabama. Nick Saban very famously said roughly a decade ago, "Is this what we want football to be?" He didn't like the way college football was going with the RPOs and the spread passing concepts. Saban's more of an old school guy at heart. Like that's the way he would prefer to play, like how he won with LSU in 2003 and how he won with at Alabama in the early days from 2008 through 2011, 2012. But he saw where the sport was going, and instead of just protesting and whining, he adjusted, and he realized that you have to be more offense first. You have to be more aggressive. And so, there was that period of time where Kirby was behind Saban because Saban was embracing the Star Wars offense. Kirby still was focused on man ball. And, it took some time for Kirby to, he developed his, toughness first philosophy, his defense first philosophy. But like last year under Todd Monken, who was a great hire as offensive coordinator, like Georgia was able to win a shootout against Ohio State in the Peach Bowl. And I think the 2019, the 2020 version of Kirby Smart doesn't win that game. But 2022 Kirby Smart has evolved much as Saban has. You can see the evolution. You can see the openness to more concepts. You can see the pragmatic awareness of, hey, I'd like to play football in a certain style, in a certain vein, but I know that in order to win, in order to be the best, You have to have more tools in the toolbox. You have to have more ways to win. You have to have more paths to get to that victory stand in the college football playoff. So when I go back to 2023 Georgia, you lose Stetson Bennett, you lose, some other leaders from that back-to-back national championship roster. But if we've learned anything, it's that you don't have to have the superstar quarterback, right? And I mean, Stetson Bennett, he was underappreciated and he was underrated in the course of his Georgia career. But in the same breath, he was not Caleb Williams. He was not CJ Stroud. He was not one of these, very high-end guys who would go in the top 10, 15 of the NFL draft. And yet, Georgia was able to integrate him into the offense. I draw the historical comparison between Stetson Bennett and Ken Dorsey. Ken Dorsey was a very, very good quarterback at Miami, but he wasn't asked to do everything. He was like an elite high-end game manager, get the ball to all these other studs, running back, tight end, wide receiver, make the right read. And I mean, Ken Dorsey is legitimately he's a college football legend. He's one of those college football quarterbacks who's a legend, not because he put up the most amazing, mind-blowing stats, but because he was a top-tier winner. Miami won 34 straight games. It would have been 35 if there wasn't that late flag in the 2003 Fiesta Bowl against Ohio State. Stetson Bennett is cut from a very similar cloth, and he's like the updated version of what Buck Bellew was for the 1980 national championship team under Vince Dooley. Very high IQ, unquestioned leader, brought it when it counted. Had a great sense and feel for what to do in the moment. Stetson Bennett's magnum opus was that Peach Bowl and those late drives. And he didn't have a perfect game in the first half, but when all the lights were bright and it was do or die in the fourth quarter in Atlanta, he delivered the goods. And so he's a winner on a top scale, and it points to Kirby Smart and Georgia being able to develop players, being able to develop instincts, and being able to cultivate a standard of performance which might not always be elite, but like the regular level of play that comes to the ball yard every Saturday is still at a higher level than the regular median performance or standard of its opponents. And so I'm looking forward to more of that in 2023. And I think that the schedule is certainly something that sets up well for Georgia. There's just going to be a few really key tests. I mean, I'm thinking mostly about Neyland Stadium late in the season, all eyes on that game. And if Georgia can get past that particular test, this team is definitely set to come back to the college football playoff and make a stand and to try to become the first three-peat national champion in college football since those Bernie Bierman Minnesota Golden Gophers of the mid-1930s. I don't know how much you've been searching the historical record book about those mid-1930s Minnesota team, but that is what Georgia is trying to match, the first three-peat since those Golden Gophers from 34 through 36.
Get him, Gophers, eh? Kirby told us as much at SEC Media Days. He stepped right up there and he said, I mean, no disrespect to those 1930s Gophers teams, but I'm just not worried about that right now. We're worried about making sure that we're 1% better tomorrow. So he let us know that he's keeping it, right here. They're focused right here.
Yes.
So, and that's the way it should be. Yeah, I would expect nothing different from that group over there. So let me just follow up just real quick on that, because you had so much to offer about Stetson and what he did. When you look at the perceived heir apparent in Carson Beck and what this offense might do, I'm of the opinion that not only will the offense be fine, but that the potential is there, given the team that's around him, that they could actually set a new points scoring record for Georgia this year. The record happened under Bobo in his last year in Athens at 41.2.7, something like that. And I think there's a real shot, especially with the schedule the way it shakes out early in the year. If they turn them loose, they could put points on the board at a clip that might eclipse that record at Georgia. I'm just curious, how do you view Carson, or whoever the Georgia starter is, But we kind of feel like it's going to be Carson. How do you view that in this Kirby Smart team?
Well, when I think about the other quarterbacks who preceded Stetson at Georgia, like Jake Fromm being a particularly notable example, I mean, there were days when Jake Fromm could look pretty ordinary. But, you surround him with the elite offensive line, you surround him with, the high quality position players. And, I do go back to the Ken Dorsey, structure at Miami. Like, the quarterback didn't have to do everything. And I think that's such an important point to realize. And it's part of why Kirby's excellent recruiting and also his philosophy about physicality at the line of scrimmage and, winning games with physicality is helps him in this regard. It's that he can go to his quarterback and say, hey, you don't have to be the hero. You don't have to put on a cape and carry us. Like we need you. You're important. You're going to have to answer the bell in very tense, pressure-packed situations. But like if the play's not there, hey, look, we got these offensive linemen, with you. We got these skill position studs with you. Let them make the play. You don't always have to be the one to make the play. And, the thing about the schedule, it's a similar dynamic to USC. So like I can speak from personal experience. I've been talking all off season about how USC has a backloaded schedule and it's going to get tough, but by having the soft ramp up in the early part of the season, USC will have time to cultivate some instincts, develop better habits, to kind of get a rhythm and get a feel for everyone. And I think that Georgia has that benefit that the September part of the schedule, it's not ruthless. And so Carson Beck has this gentle upslope in which he'll be able to learn lessons without suffocating pressure. He's probably not going to be in a really tense, difficult fourth quarter scoreboard situation, or at least one would certainly think. And he'll be able to ease his way into the season so that when you get into mid-October, then you're going to see the higher level of performance. And then like the instincts, the timing, the precision, they're all going to be right where they need to be when you get into the bigger games of the season, such as that trip to Knoxville, which we've already circled it in ink on our calendars. That he's going to be able to answer the call when it really matters.
From a national perspective, absolutely, that Tennessee game jumps off the page at you. But I will say this, the trip to Jordan-Hare, week 4 or 5, whatever it is there in the season, that'll be their first road trip, new OC, new quarterback, all that kind of stuff. Jordan-Hare's a tough place to play. And the other game that I would kind of put a red flag next to would be that Ole Miss game the week before Tennessee. Can you handle your business like a champion would and then get to Tennessee and make that game matter? So just putting it out there. I mean,
that's right. That's a look-ahead game, that Ole Miss game. Absolutely.
Yep, there we go. All right, well, I appreciate that. So now let's keep it close to home for you a little bit. When I think back, like the first college football dynasty that I lived through, I mean, I was paying attention to the Nebraska teams, Tommy Frazier, those teams. But the first one that I lived through, or what I perceived to be a dynasty, would be Pete Carroll's USC Trojans of the early 2000s. That was a 5 or 6 year run where I just felt like there was no oxygen in the sport. Like I just felt like when USC showed up, they had the best players. They were going to end up on top, and they did most of the time. So I had, as a 22-year-old, I had no problem looking at that team and saying that's a dynasty. As someone who's twice that age now, when I look at these Dogs, I don't look at them as a dynasty. But I'm just curious, from somebody who covers the Trojans and was paying attention at that time too, how do you view what Kirby's done in his time in Athens, especially over the last 6 years? The first year, you're breaking everything in. Year 2, they're in the national championship game. So let's just take from that point and move forward. How do you stack up this run of the last 6 years against what Pete Carroll and those Trojans did?
I mean, they're pretty much on the same level. Like I would view, like if you're going to call Pete Carroll's USC teams a dynasty, you have to call Kirby Smart's Georgia teams a dynasty. Like I don't think you can say this fits it and this one doesn't. I think they're both really in the same basket. What Pete Carroll's teams did that Georgia has not done is they were winning their conference every single year. They won the Pac-10, each of those 6 years from 2003 to 2008. They shared it with Washington State in 2002, but Washington State went to the Rose Bowl. I view that as, Washington State won the Pac-10 that year. But nevertheless, USC with 6 straight conference championships, and Georgia, hasn't been winning the SEC every year. Alabama's been winning it some of the time. But on the other hand, Georgia won back-to-back college football playoff national championships. And USC fans will say, well, we won back-to-back, but they didn't win back-to-back BCS national championship games. And that's why the 2006 Rose Bowl against Texas, hurts USC's place in various historical arguments. If USC had done that, then that takes it to a much higher level. But it didn't happen. Vince Young stood in the way. That 4th and 2 at midfield got stopped. And so I really do think, right now you put Georgia and USC right on the same plane. Like, so you could say that Georgia has 2, quote unquote, official national titles. USC has 1, quote unquote, official national title and an unofficial, Associated Press national title. We really wanted to play USC in the Superdome. I mean, wanted to play LSU in the Superdome in 2003. Or January 2004. And of course, we couldn't believe that when Oklahoma got dump trucked by Kansas State 35-7 and yet still was invited into that BCS championship game. Like, no one at USC can believe it even now, nearly 20 years later. One of the other things that makes it difficult to compare Pete Carroll's USC teams with Kirby's Georgia teams is that, it was an uneven playing field in the sense of USC was in the BCS, Georgia was in the playoff. And just imagine if we had the 4-team playoff in the Pete Carroll era, USC would have been in that playoff. And the way USC played in its bowl games under Pete Carroll, you give Pete Carroll a month to prepare his defensive schemes, his zone blitzes in the second half. USC would have played in a lot more national championship games if there had been a 4-team playoff. But in the same token, like, Georgia's been there regularly, and you can't take that away from Kirby and what he's done. And Georgia really has wrested, number 1 status from Nick Saban and Alabama. And that is an accomplishment that, really dwarfs anything that Pete Carroll did in his time at USC. And also, Clemson with under Dabo, Dabo still had it rolling at Clemson in the early part of Kirby's Georgia tenure. And, Kirby's taken Georgia far beyond, where Clemson ever was. So, really going through Dabo and Saban and now being on the mountaintop in an unquestioned way, like, Pete Carroll can't offer an equivalent accomplishment. You didn't have one dynastic giant in the early 2000s that USC had to pass. It was a lot more fluid, right? Because right. LSU in 2003, that was not necessarily expected. 2002 Ohio State, I think, caught everybody by surprise. I mean, people were not expecting the Buckeyes to win the national title. Like, Miami really was the program, because that 2001 Miami team, right up there with the great all-time teams in college football history, certainly in terms of elite NFL talent, really hard to top 2001 Miami. So if anything, Miami was the team, but then after that 2002 season and Ken Dorsey leaves, and you had Larry Coker on the downswing of that Miami program. They had one more good year in 2003, but then after that, it all abruptly came to a halt. So by the time that USC was ascending in 2003, Miami was descending. And of course, USC and Miami never got to play in a national championship game or in a top tier bowl game. But, for Georgia, I mean, like, Georgia did beat Clemson in the regular season, that early game in Charlotte, and Georgia's had to beat Alabama to win its national title. So it's been a more direct path for Kirby through the giants who were already on the scene. And that's something that Pete Carroll didn't go through. So I really think they're on the same level. But if you were to ask me, if you were to put a gun to my head, which coach has done more, it's Kirby and it's Georgia. that they slightly outpace USC, and I do reiterate that USC missed out because it didn't have the 4-team playoff. So that's something that like USC couldn't have controlled. But nevertheless, circumstances being what they are, situations being what they are, Kirby and Georgia have done slightly more than USC in aggregate, in terms of like this a 6 or 7 year block of time.
Well, I appreciate that perspective. And the flip side of that coin, I appreciate the way you couched that, because it feels like this entire offseason I've been discussing with people about the difference between what the BCS looked like versus what the CFP looks like. And the fact that Georgia is now the only team to ever win back-to-back national championships in the playoff, right? That's a distinction, because clearly you had the semifinal round and then you got to get up again and go do it. And whether or not, which one's better, which one's harder, that sort of thing. So when you flip it the other way around, and a point of pride and a point of privilege, I would like to point out that Georgia is the only CFP champion to have defeated every other team that has ever won the CFP championship. And they've done that in the span of 2 years. So that in itself is pretty impressive. Like you said, they had to battle the big boss to get there, right? So that's just one more point. Again, as an alum, I'm like, go Dogs. So moving along, let's spin it forward a little bit. And this is always difficult because the world of college football, it's for lack of a better phrase, it's imploding, right? There's movement everywhere, conference realignment, NIL, players are everywhere. None of us know what the sport's going to look like in 3 years, much less 5. But that's where I'm going to peg it. And I'm going to ask you to take a look at Kirby Smart and Georgia and tell me where you think Georgia as a program is going to be in 5 years, and then where that program is going to be positioned in the landscape of college football nationally.
Well, so a few things that are really worth noting here. One is that, Clemson had established itself at a really high level, but then dropped off for a few years. And I think it's important to understand why Clemson did drop off. Now, you could say correctly enough that DJ Uiagalelei, having the throwing yips, much as like a tennis player has the yips on a service toss, they have a hard time throwing the ball in the right spot, the same spot all the time, so that their service motion and technique are thrown off. So it's similar for, also like a baseball player, a pitcher who suddenly can't locate his pitches, or a second baseman who's always throwing wildly to first base. So part of that was just DJ having throwing yips, but it wasn't the whole story, right? And one of the reasons, in my estimation, that Clemson fell off the mountaintop is that Dabo has an aversion to the transfer portal. He hates it so much that he really hasn't used it. And this again is where Saban, Kirby, they both have evolved over a longer period of time. They've proven that they can evolve in ways that Dabo quite hasn't lived up to, quite hasn't matched at Clemson. Kirby and Saban have no qualms about going into the transfer portal, getting the talent they need. And if Kirby and Saban have both shown that they're willing to change their style of play if that's what it takes to be successful. Now, Dabo, by hiring Garrett Riley, Lincoln Riley's younger brother, as offensive coordinator, though that's really good. That shows that Dabo's wants to, is not satisfied, doing things exactly his way. He's willing to bring in an outsider, to soup up his offense. Okay, now that's a sign of evolution. But in the transfer portal, that's still where Dabo lags behind Kirby and Saban a little bit. And so that to me is why Alabama and Georgia are a few notches ahead of Clemson, and have been a few notches ahead of Clemson the past 2 years. So if we look at the next several years in college football, Dabo's going to have to get on the portal train. He will need to say, I give up, you win, that I need to get in the portal along with everybody else. I need to get my hands dirty. I need to be part of this. If Dabo can just swallow a little bit of pride and realize that this is part of a modern coach's job description, maybe Clemson gets back onto the same tier as Alabama and Georgia. But if not, it's still going to be Alabama and Georgia running the sport. And then here's now the other thing. Nick Saban, like he loves coaching, and like he's not going to retire the next 2-3 years. But if we talk about the next 5-6 years, we get into 2029, 2030, around then, that's advantage Georgia, right? Because Saban's going to be getting older, and even someone as great as he's been, like he's the greatest all-time coach in college football history. I think he's surpassed Bear Bryant in that regard. Saban's not going to do this forever. Like no one's going to do it forever. Like is Saban really going to be doing this when he's pushing 80 years old? It's a variable. We don't know that, but it's most likely going to be harder for him. And so Kirby is not going to be at that place. He's going to have a lot more runway. He's going to have a lot more time at Georgia, assuming that he wants it. And of course, why wouldn't he? So, when you look at Dabo being averse to the transfer portal, when you look at the Saban age factor, and you put those two things into a conversation about where will Georgia be in the next 6 years, I think Georgia really is in the best position of any college football program. You also add in, is Jim Harbaugh going to finally go back to the NFL? It's because he can, he's about 60 years old, I think. He has time to scratch that itch one more time. He does have one more NFL run if he wants it. And, you wonder just how much he's going to tire about the NCAA nipping at his heels over hamburgers and whatnot. And also you have at Ohio State, you have Ryan Day. Everyone in the industry thinks, he's going to go to the NFL before too long, that he'll want to try himself and bet on himself at the NFL level. It might not be this year, it might not be the next, but eventually Ryan Day will want to go to the NFL. So Michigan, Ohio State, Clemson with Dabo in the portal, Alabama with Saban, getting into his mid and then upper 70s. There are certain questions that other top 5 level programs have that Georgia does not. And so, okay, I'm going on a Georgia show here, and you could just say that I'm trying to spin it positively for Georgia. But no, I really do think I look at the landscape, and that's what I see. I see unique plot point question marks and uncertainties for Michigan, Ohio State, Clemson, Alabama, and Georgia doesn't have quite as many. Now, I do think that not having Todd Monken, to me, if I'm looking at Georgia and I'm being a little bit concerned about now and maybe the next few years, I thought that Todd Monken was a tremendous offensive coordinator. He called great plays. He really made things easier for Stetson Bennett and that offense. You also look at Ladd McConkey and how the coaching staff developed him. He was not this, super duper talent the way Brock Bowers is. Brock Bowers, the talent just boom, jumps off the page. He's a freak. He's an absolutely devastating player who's going to have this amazing NFL career. Ladd McConkey, he's that, I'm a Seattle Seahawk fan in the NFL. And, Steve Largent, of course, is kind of the prototype for the guy who wasn't the fastest guy in the gym in the building, but he knew how to get open. But he had a teammate. Some people might not remember this name, but Paul Scansey. He was like the junior Largent, and he didn't have the Hall of Fame career that Largent had, but nothing about him screamed, "Oh, what a world-class athlete!" Just a scrawny little white guy. But he got open, he made catches. So that's kind of Ladd McConkey, that didn't have this Brock Bowers skill set that just blew everybody away. But look at him. He was just making play after play after play last season. So that told me that Todd Monken knew what to do with him. That told me that Georgia's player development was absolutely right on point. And you need those kinds of hidden gems to be part of a national championship team. You need those kinds of players. You need those kinds of success stories. But so Todd Monken not being around, if I'm looking at Georgia dispassionately, just as a cold-eyed observer from the outside, that's my number one concern. It's not so much the quarterback or the offense in general, but Todd Monken really maximized the material in Athens, and you wonder how all the pieces are going to fit this year.
Right. The schemes and concepts, Monken was a genius in the way he used his motions to free people up and get those matchups that you have to get people schemed open. And we will see. Everything, is going to play out right in front of our eyes. So that's going to be very interesting. And you mentioned Ladd. We love Ladd over here. He was not a top-tier recruit. When he got the Georgia offer, that bumped him to 3 stars, if you know what I mean. And the thing about Ladd that people maybe don't know is that, and he talked about this week in his press availability, is that he actually runs with the top tier guys on the team when it comes to speed. He's like the flat out track guys, like Arian Smith. He's like, I can't keep up with him, but I can still nudge that 4.4, 4.5. He can move, but he's not a track guy. And the thing about Ladd is that he's so small, and you saw this I say small, I don't mean that in a bad way, but he's not a 6'4" guy.
He's not this Hulk. Yeah.
No, he's not. And you saw this in the SEC championship game and against Ohio State too, where he was a little banged up, had a little tendonitis or something working. He wasn't at 100%. That's because he throws his body around so much as a team player. He's out there run blocking in the run game on the perimeter as much as, say, a Rosemy Jack Saint might be, or a Darnell Washington. He's given it his all. So he's all dog through and through, and we love him. Damn good dog. That's what we say. Matt.
He definitely has that dog in him.
He absolutely does. Matt, thank you so much for taking time to come with us and give a little perspective on what this 23 Georgia unit's going to look like. Before we let you get out of here, you're over at Trojans Wire. So if people want to go check out Matt's work, check him out over there. And Matt, let everybody just know where they can find you if they want to hear more or read more of your work.
So trojanswire.usatoday.com. And, so USC's playing on August 26th. So you can get post-game coverage on that weekend of USC football. And then, of course, throughout the season. But also we're writing about realignment scenarios since, we're still in the Pac-12 for one more year. And the Pac-12's dying. So we're wondering about Stanford to the ACC and how that's going. So we're covering realignment if you like that sort of thing as well. And then, of course, follow me at the Voice of College Football. I do a show every Monday night with Mark Rogers. That's Mark Rogers TV on Twitter. Every Monday night at 11 in the East, 8 Pacific. Come on over and visit the USC Trojans live show every Monday. And it's not just during the season. It's nearly every Monday over the whole year. I take one or two Mondays off in the off season, but for the next 4 or 5 months, just catch us for USC analysis live Mondays at 11 in the East, 8 in the West.
Now that is one USC show that I will watch. So there you go, friends. Take it from me. I've seen it. Matt brings it every week. You got a taste of it here tonight. Matt, since we're here, this is a bonus. I just got to throw it in because
Sure.
I have you. But since this is your last year in the Pac-12, as you mentioned, I say your USC's last year in the Pac-12.
Yeah.
On the way out the door, tell me who's the favorite to win the Pac-12. Who are you putting your money on?
It is USC, and it's USC because, if you look at the consensus top 4 teams in the Pac-12, that consensus top 4 consists of USC, Washington, Oregon, Utah. In some order, that's most likely to be the top 4 in the Pac-12. All 4 of those teams play each other this season. There are no schedule gaps, so there's a purity about it that all 4 teams are going to play each other. They don't skip anyone. So it's basically like a 3-game tournament. And so if you lose 2 of the 3 games in that round robin, you're done. You're cooked. And if you win 2 of 3 games, you're most likely going to Las Vegas for the Pac-12 championship game. So when you consider that overview of the Pac-12 and the race to the title, if the teams that get a majority of those 3 games against each other at home, they have the inside track. So USC gets Utah and Washington at home at Oregon. Washington gets Oregon and Utah at home at USC. But Oregon and Utah, they're playing 2 of those 3 games on the road. So just by that logic alone. USC and Washington have the inside track because as long as they defend their home field, they're going to win 2 of the 3 games against the other top-tier teams that figure to battle for the conference title. Now, there's the fly in the ointment, as Tim Brando says. That's Oregon State. Oregon State would be probably the consensus number 5 pick behind the top 4. And so if DJ Uiagalelei wows everybody, and if Jonathan Smith can figure him out and get him to play his best football, Oregon State could be the troublemaker. But guess what? USC does not play Oregon State. Washington does. Utah does. Oregon does. So just the fact that USC doesn't play Oregon State, that's another slight advantage to USC. So if you ask me right now, preseason pick, it's most likely going to be USC against Washington, but no one would be too stunned if it's like Utah, Oregon, because USC still has an Alex Grinch defense. We all know that Alex Grinch defenses have not been very good. Like, no one would be stunned if, the USC defense implodes. Like, that would not be a new thing under Lincoln Riley. And then Utah is the 2-time defending Pac-12 champion. So, like, you can't underestimate Kyle Whittingham. And then Oregon very nearly made the Pac-12 title game last year, had a 17-point lead over Oregon State and blew it. But if Oregon had won that game, it would have been in the Pac-12 title game. So, like, it's a loaded Pac-12. It's really sad, right? This conference is dying, and yet the story should be, wow, this is going to be an amazing year of Pac-12 football. Pac-12 hasn't been this good at the top in a very long time. And yet, of course, those idiots, the presidents and chancellors, couldn't manage the conference, couldn't keep it going. That's very Pac-12. But, hey, at least we get this one final Pac-12 football season. It should be extremely fun. Like, get ready for some 48-45 games. You're likely to see quite a few of them because you have all these elite quarterbacks. They're not just good, but like they're coming back for another year. So right. You have elite veteran quarterbacks at all 4 of the top schools: Cam Rising, Michael Penix, Bo Nix, Caleb Williams, all really good last year. They come back this year with most of their receivers coming back, and you have defenses that have question marks. So, just get that popcorn ready and be prepared to watch, 48-45 games. So for like Georgia fans, get prepared to watch the 2018 Rose Bowl every Saturday. Just imagine that.
Get your 5-hour energies or put a coffee pot on and stay up late and watch some Pac-12 football is what you're telling me.
Exactly.
I got no problem with that. Matt, thank you so much for taking time to be here with me. I appreciate it very much. I'm certain my viewers do. And we will talk to you again very soon, friend.
It's my great pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, everybody, we're back with another insider here on the Georgia Beat. This time it's Roddy Nabulsi of UGAsports.com. Roddy, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me on.
Man, I'm excited about this bit. I'm so glad you decided to join us because when I look around the ecosystem of Georgia, there aren't many people that are more plugged in than you, and I really do appreciate you taking time to come and give our viewers the insight that you have. One of the things I'd like to start with is, here at ADB, we don't just want you to watch the game. We want you to see the game. And as I mentioned, nobody's really more plugged in than you are. So when you look at this 2023 season, what about this Georgia Bulldog team in particular are you expecting? What do you think? How do you think it's going to play out?
Well, I expect they'll go through the regular season undefeated. That's the way the schedule bounced. It's the way the other teams recruited and played out. I mean, I remember one point Georgia had more 4-stars committed than South Carolina had in like 3 years or something like that. I mean, it's not like a shot against Shane Beamer. It's just, they were far behind where Georgia was in Kirby's 8th year. He's got this team loaded. This 1-85 is pretty bloody impressive. I mean, it's they look like Alabama looked, when Georgia would go play Alabama, it looked like a high school team playing a college team or a college team playing a pro team. Now Georgia is the standard. When we talk to NFL scouts, they're like, man, I love coming to Georgia because I got all my guys in one spot and I can, pick them out and I get to watch them go up against other NFL guys. It helps me as a scout versus going to a school that may have one guy or 2 guys. So this team from top to bottom is pretty loaded. And even though there may be some questions at, cornerback or running back or quarterback, wherever, who's going to play what spot, the options that you have are 4 and 5 star guys across the way. Nobody that Georgia plays in the regular season is going to have as many top players as they do. There's nobody they face like that. Now, when they get to the SEC championship and play who I expect to see Alabama there, then it's going to be much tighter. When you make it to the playoffs, that's going to be much tighter. So I expect Georgia to burn, and even with one loss, which Georgia can beat themselves. I say it every year when it comes to, they should say almost lost, but they had that tight game against Missouri last year. And everybody was worried about how the Tennessee game would go down. When you can lose a close game, you can have turnovers, you can have penalties, and you can have special teams flubs. That's the perfect recipe for a upset. But again, that would be where Georgia beat themselves. And I don't think that Kirby's going to let this team get in its own way. So I expect them to go 12-0 and then finally really be tested somewhere in the postseason.
Well, everybody kind of knows that Georgia's supposed to be good. We all expect them to be good. So, and based off what you just said there, clearly the odds are high that they're going to get through the season without too much damage. Let's put it that way. I mean, it's difficult to go 12-0, but things happen.
It's very hard.
It's when you're looking, just if you spin that thought forward just a little bit, right? So what are one of the things that might determine how this season goes? What's going to dictate how it plays out? And I mean, we all know that the quarterback is important. We know that injuries are important. Is there anything beyond that you might be able to point to and say, if this goes this way, Georgia's going to have a good or bad season?
I mean, you could have, I don't know, you had so many off the field issues, and for the entire offseason did not go the way Georgia wanted to do, especially as back-to-back champions. You had way too many bad headlines. I don't think that carries over into this team. Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint met with the media yesterday, and he said, "Look, I'm trying to put it behind me," and he did. He owned up to it. And Kirby is all about accountability. They have accountability after every practice. So I don't see that being an issue. I don't think that they can actually get complacent because we spoke to Oscar Dell. We said, "Hey, won a title last year. What makes you've won the teams won back-to-back ones? Wasn't some sort of complacency set in?" He goes, "Well, I didn't really do a whole lot. I want to win a championship where I contributed a lot, and that's why they won it last year. You had all those guys who won it, in 2021. A ton of them went off last year and had all the big plays. They weren't the playmakers the year before, so they wanted. It wasn't." There's new names out there. You didn't have Jordan Davis out there, so somebody else wanted to come in and play and win a title for themselves. So I don't see complacency being an issue. Of course, injuries could just derail the team. Right now, you've got 5 scholarship running backs. 3 of them are injured. 2 of them, I know Branson Robinson's going to be out for a while. We don't know how Kendall Milton should play out, but hopefully he'll be fine. But I mean, what if Dejan Edwards gets banged up and now you're down to a true freshman in Roderick Robinson? And that, I mean, I know we want to take out injuries, but that can throw off your season. But I will say the one thing that can mess up this team's chances would come down to the gray matter between 3 different players, and it's your 3 quarterbacks. What is going on between their ears? And I'm not saying that you need to worry about it, but you had an alpha dog quarterback last year in Stetson Bennett. You had a guy who believed he was better than the other quarterback across the way. And maybe these guys feel that same way, but they have to prove it. And against UT Martin, they're going to prove it. Against Ball State, Vandy, South Carolina, they're going to be fine. They'll probably be fine through 12 games, no matter who you throw out there. Gunnar Stockton would lead this team fine. Brock Vandegrift would lead this team fine. Carson Beck, kind of the heir apparent, he shouldn't have any trouble. There's just too many talented players. I mean, you can lose 2 wide receivers, and the wide receiver room is probably deeper than it's been in years. You got a great offensive front with some good backups. They're not as good as they have been in the past, and meaning when you had Jamari Sawyer, you take him out of the game, you put in Broderick Jones, a first-round pick. take out Warren McClendon, you put in Demarius Mims, probably another first round pick. You don't have that kind of depth on the offensive line like you used to, but he's had other guys that can do it. But what happens when one of these Georgia quarterbacks has a game like they did against Missouri last year, where you're looking at going down 17-3 or something? You're looking at right in the gullet. What happens when it's freezing like it was in Kentucky last year? Maybe one of the coldest games I've ever covered. What happens when you go down to Ohio State, a team that was seemingly scoring at will, go down by double digits twice? Not once. You fight back, and then all of a sudden, boom, they score quickly on you, and you're down double digits a second time. What was between the ears on Stetson Bennett was this will to win, this indomitable drive to prove himself. And these guys may have the same thing. They've had to sit behind him, and that they want to prove themselves. But what happens when there's a lot of pressure? So the one thing that you could see happen is, I don't want to say somebody folds under pressure, but they just can't get it done. Can they? They can't get the team to rally around them. And honestly, I remember covering some teams that had a ton of NFL talent, and everybody was waiting for someone else to make a play. I think maybe it was that 2012 defense that all those guys drafted. And they were just everybody was waiting for somebody else to make a big play, and sometimes they struggled. So that, to me, the one thing that could offset them or upset this run would be an inexperienced quarterback in a big game being challenged maybe for the first time all season.
Yeah, I think playing in this league, I think at some point they're going to come across that. So we're all going to learn that together. I think that's a good point. Now, one of the things that you have had your fingers in for a lot of years, and one of the reasons that I really wanted to have you be a part of this discussion is recruiting is part of the game. It is the lifeblood of college football. But a lot of people today have a misunderstanding about what recruiting is, because it's not my dad's recruiting. It works completely differently. And the bogeyman in the room is NIL, right? That's what everybody wants to talk about. And I really appreciate the way that you have confronted NIL on your platform, and the way you've educated the fans about what it means at the University of Georgia. And as I want my viewers to have that information. If you will, take a second and tell us a little something about the way NIL works in the recruiting world today, but more specifically about how it works at the University of Georgia, because I think that's something that a lot of people would love a little transparency on.
Well, the first thing you have to realize is the coaches can't set it up. They can tell their collectives, but the school can't set up a deal between a car dealership and a player. But you can have collectives, you can have people who do this for a living set it up, and they can talk to the schools and tell them what's going on as part of the back and forth. So the schools can make their wishes known, but they can't control it. They can't promise a kid, hey, if you come here, we've got a car dealership set up, we've got a bank set up, we've got a lawyer set up, and you're going to make $500,000. But you can be one step removed from that with a collective. The collectives can do that and say, look, we at Rivals.com, we cover recruiting. We have thousands of subscribers. A lot of those people own businesses. They advertise on our shows. They follow every blow on the recruiting trail. And they know that if a kid's coming in, like say a Dylan Raiola or a Ryan Puglisi, I want that quarterback to be the face of my car dealership. I want him to be the face of my pest control company, whoever it is. And they can go to, in Georgia's case, the Classic City Collective, and say, look, I'm going to put up $100,000. I want that kid hawking my wares. I want him to be the face of my company. And they can let him know, hey, we've got this, because could be coming. But of course, the school can't do that because that would be an inducement. But if the collective does it, it's okay. Splitting hairs there, but that's officially how it goes down. Now, what Kirby Smart does is he says, look, I know there's a lot of people who would love to give Dylan Raiola a ton of money. We are not going to do that. We're going to, and that's great if he does it, but I want everyone to be pretty much close to the same. Just pulling a number out of the air, let's say $150,000. I don't want anybody to get more than that. Or we're not going to cobble these things together and present them with a deal more than that. Because if you look at someone like, say, Cedric Van Pran, your starting center who did not have that option when he came to school, he couldn't come in at that. Maybe he doesn't have that much. So let's say if a a new center comes in and you offer to pay him $250,000 and Cedric Van Pran's only making like $50,000, well, two things are going to happen. Cedric's going to be mad, and the new guy's going to be like, well, man, I get paid 5 times what you do, because they're going to talk. No, don't think for a second everyone won't know what everybody else is making. That's just not how it works. And he's like, why do they need to listen to you, old man? I mean, they want me more. They think more of me because they're paying me more than you. And that happens. And we've seen this happen at other schools where, well, I mean, Luther Burden out of Missouri got a fantastic NIL deal. Georgia's going head-to-head with him. Missouri put together something that, the Missouri Collective put together something that he couldn't say no to. And he's an in-state kid. But Dominic Lovett was much more productive. Dominic Lovett left Missouri, now plays for Georgia. He'll be going against Missouri this coming year. So they coached him last year. Now they got to coach against him this year. So, again, that's not to say that there was bad blood in Missouri, but you could see how that would happen. Georgia lost Bear Alexander. He wanted more playing time and more money. Also, if these guys are getting a lot of money, the people that give it are going to expect to see them play. If I've given you $200,000 for a quarterback, I expect that quarterback to be on the field. And if you call me up this year and say, hey, is there anybody else you want? I'm like, no, I still haven't seen my player out there. So it becomes kind of a minefield. What Kirby Smart does is to tell them, let's try to keep it at a certain level, very competitive, but we're not going to go to these crazy numbers for individual guys, because that sets up a hierarchy in the locker room and it pits the older guys against the younger guys. Now, if we have extra monies above that baseline, let's offer it to Cedric Van Pran when he's about to go pro. Let's get him to come back. Let's take care of our starters. Let's take care of our guys who did not have that. Hey, get Xavier Truss, your starting left guard, a huge mountain of a man. Let's get something for him versus a guy who's a true freshman who has plenty of years to do this. So let's incentivize guys who may be thinking about going to the NFL. Let's incentivize them to stay, and let's reward the guys who've proven themselves to be great players. Now, we've seen this go back and forth with a couple of 5-star guys recently in KJ Bolden and Williams Dewari. KJ Bolden, I think, number 9 player. Dewari is number 3. 2 top 10 guys. KJ's I think he visited Georgia 16, 17 times, was committed to Georgia silently for a month. But at the last second, Florida State comes out and says, hey, we're going to double our offer. Well, I mean, KJ would be a fool to turn that down. Because in his mind, and just about everyone else, he's going to the NFL anyway. He'll get drafted out of FSU just like he get drafted out of Georgia. Although I know that he and his dad really wanted to come to Georgia for the development that he would get under Fran Brown, Will Muschamp, and Kirby Smart. But these guys are all being told, you're a first-round draft pick. So how much development do you need? Plus, if you come here, you're going to get twice as much as going there. So Kirby does not like to get into a bidding war for these guys. He's selling the NFL. Take less now, be a part of the team, be a little selfless, let us take care of our older guys, and come compete against the best. Then you'll get drafted. Like they had 28 guys drafted in the last 2 years, and let's look at the checks that these guys get. So he's selling development and future paychecks versus an immediate payout, and that works on a lot of them. Again, Georgia has the number 1 class in the country right now. They're going to get a few more players, and they'll probably finish number 1, and it'll look genius. And they'll all be with guys who really kind of want to be Georgia Bulldogs, and it will bite you in other situations. So that's just how he does it. And of course, every fan base, every time Georgia wins one, they say, they accuse Georgia of dropping giant bags. And every time another team wins a kid, they're accused of it. I can tell you the standard philosophy at Georgia is we're going to pay them very close to the same amount across the board. We have a hard limit on it, and only in very, very special cases will we go above that. And you can tell when they do, they get really nervous, because they're like, this doesn't make us comfortable because it goes against our core philosophy.
Yeah. And this is an ever-changing landscape. It's not going to look the same in 3 years or 5 years as it looks right now.
As the money comes in, you can pay them all a ton, So as the Classic City Collective builds up its war chest, you have enough money to take care of your seniors, and you have enough money to take care of your guys who are going to be starters next year. again, because remember, you got to recruit all those players to keep them from transferring.
Right.
So it's not just going to the NFL. You could have a sophomore who's like, oh, he's going to be really good next year, but he's got a starting job waiting for him in South Carolina, but he's going to have to fight for one here. And their collective's offering this kid, X amount of money if he puts his name in the portal. Not to say South Carolina's doing that, but the background, some of this happens, ahead of time. They're like, if he goes over there, he's going to get a new NIL deal. So it's you got to fight to keep the ones you have that you don't want to transfer, and the ones that might go to the NFL.
Right. I think there are two takeaways from that. One, everyone has their hands in the NIL game. There is not a major university out there that's not playing the NIL game. It's just how they play it. And two,
Exactly.
with the various laws across the country, the different schools have different access to what they can do, and I think that matters as well. And there's certainly just a lot of fog around this whole thing from a layman's perspective. So I appreciate you putting a little sunlight on that for our viewers, because I personally found that information to be very valuable, because I know I'd looked at it a lot over the last 6 months, and finding out how teams are doing it was difficult. So I appreciate that. Now as we finish up our time here, I mentioned earlier, really, there's nobody more plugged in than Roddy around Athens and the University of Georgia. And well, I just know what I see. So it's one of those things where you have known Kirby for a lot of years, and you've covered him, obviously, every day for the last 7 years. You hear this is year 8. So what I would love to know, I think what our viewers would like to know is, what is your favorite, or maybe your best, Kirby Smart story since he's gotten back? Well, it doesn't have to be just since he's gotten back, but what's your favorite Kirby Smart story?
I think my favorite one was maybe year 1 when he wanted to call me, and somebody walked up to me and said, "Hey, you're going to be getting a phone call in about 10 minutes. It'll be from Kirby." I was at a golf tournament that I'd gone out to see, and he called me on someone else's phone and showed up as a private number, and he asked me a question, and I'll keep the conversation to ourselves. I think it's the only time I ever spoke to him one-on-one on the phone. And I'm like, you couldn't even call me from your own damn phone so I could have your number in here. He's not a fan of media. I didn't take it personally, but I'm like, well, you don't have his phone number, that I can't text him all the time and ask him questions. I thought that was hilarious. But I think it's something that popped up a couple of years ago that taught me how Kirby Smart was different than anybody else. And we actually talked about it on the UGA Sports Live show on Tuesday. This coming Friday, or some Friday, in the middle of camp, in the middle of preseason practice, they will practice going to the movies. That sounds stupid, but I'm not joking. They will practice what they do for a home game or an away game. They will get on buses. They will go to like the hotel. They will then go, here's how you travel. Here's how we check in. Here's how we go to the movie, because they have a movie night, and we usually break the news about what movie they're watching. Maybe nobody cares, but maybe they do. But I don't know. But when we find out, we tell our readers at UGA Sports. And so maybe this Friday night, they will practice going to the movies. And here's like, they don't rent out the whole thing. You put them in there with the regular people who are watching the movies. But it's like, what bus do you get on? How long do you go? How do you don't leave anybody there. So don't go from your movie into another movie and still be in there when it's time to leave. They practice going to the movies. That's how detailed Kirby Smart is. He's not going to leave it up to chance. He's not going to leave it up to somebody missing curfew and then, of course, having to sit out the game or sit out a quarter or something like that. I'm like, the attention to detail that Kirby Smart does is beyond the pale. Just blows my mind. And I remember, I'm like, I'm going to break a story about them practicing going to the movies. Hey, this is a new one for me, but that's what it is.
You're exactly right. That's all I was thinking the entire time, is it's just the attention to detail. And the other side of that, just to bring this full circle for our viewers is, when you look at games like the Notre Dame game in Athens or the game against Ohio State, the recognition of formations, so to get those timeouts and things, it all comes from preparation and attention to detail. So if you think going to the movies doesn't matter, you're wrong.
Yeah, I mean, and his staff's that way. Kirby Smart could be the most arrogant coach in the country. Everyone said, oh, you're just a, Saban, not even a clone, but, a spinoff. It's Saban's defense. Yeah, it's not going to work. And then, I think first year he went 7-5, was not a good season. Then he played for a title the next year. Then he won a couple of them. His coaching tree is phenomenal when you look at the coaches he's had hired out from underneath him, and it's pretty good. You had other guys Mike Bobo came back because he wanted to be under Kirby and learn that system. He's like, I need to learn the Saban Smart way of practicing, how they go about what they do. I want to learn that style. Mm-hmm. And Mike said it. I didn't come back just because it was Athens, and that's where I met my wife and my kids are born. I came back to be an analyst to improve myself, vocational training to be under him. And it's that the fact that Kirby could be arrogant, but he pushes his staff every day, learn something new today. I'm going to learn something new today. What else can we do? And the number one place it'll show up, the timeouts are a good example of that, where I think, I was trying to remember one of those things, it was a guy upstairs had seen the formation and tells the coach yells it to Kirby runs out there and stops it. Or maybe it's just Kirby saw it. There's two conflicting scenarios in how that actually worked out. But all the coaches are trying to improve because Kirby expects them, what did we learn new today? What techniques did you learn today? What did you do better? Here's what I learned to do better. But what it really happens is when those guys come in on a recruiting visit, they will tell you that it is unlike any other visit that's out there. And a lot of it is those attentions to details. Where do the parents park when they come in? What is waiting for them when they arrive? How is their day schedule? What are the snacks? It is an attention to detail on the recruiting end that is the reason he has the number one recruiting class in the nation right now, and will usually be in that discussion.
That is good stuff right there. It's like he said. He told us at SEC Media Day, better never rests. Yeah. I think they live it out in Athens. I think they live what they preach. So, Roddy, thanks again for taking time to sit down with me. I want to give you a chance here. Let everybody know what you got going on over at UGAsports.com and, where they can find you if they want to hear you in the interwebs.
Well, the easiest thing to do is just search UGAsports.com. That'll take you to our website where you can sign up free for 30 days. You can use promo code UGA30. Try it free for 30 days. Come check out the message board. We break a lot of news. We broke some injury news this week about Lawson Lucky, and I'm about to do an update on him here in just a second. We always have a lot of news, a lot of analysis, a lot of opinion, more coverage, tons of recruiting coverage, but that message board, the community UGA Sports, is phenomenal. So check them out. And of course, and in that Google search, you'll also see our YouTube channels and our Instagram and our TikTok and all that stuff. So just remember UGA Sports. We've been doing this since 1998. I've been covering Georgia since 1993. So this will be my 30th year. So, we basically started before there was an internet. God, I'm old. Anyway, check out UGA Sports when you get a chance. You can check it out for free.
Wonderful, Roddy. Better never rest. Neither do you. Neither do I. Thank you for being with me, friend.
My pleasure.
There you have it. Everything you need to know about the 2023 Georgia Bulldogs before they kick the season off against UT Martin, and a little perspective on the national college football landscape as well. Nothing left to do now except play the games. Go Dogs!
Told them, how about them fucking dogs? That's what I told them.